Hi, I'm Dr. Whitten, and today we're going to explore my health and wellness journey. I have been a holistic chiropractor since 1998, and I've spent the last 20 years developing my own healing system called the Whitten Method. It came from applied kinesiology, so muscle testing. So I'd taken the courses in muscle testing that were offered at the chiropractic school, applied kinesiology, and then I studied clinical kinesiology, which was the next generation of applied kinesiology. It was far more advanced than AK, but there was only about 10 practitioners in the world. So I studied that work for about 3 years, and I found some gaps in that system. It was too complex, and it left out some vital pieces of information that I wanted to include in my healing system. So I've spent the last 20 years improving and simplifying and teaching my work. So today I wanted to discuss how I got to that point where I'm developing my own healing system. Something like that doesn't just happen overnight, right? It's an entire life's journey. And so I want to go into some of that backstory. So I was born to very interesting parents. My mother was having fun in the 60s and living kind of a wild life. My dad was a graduate student at Harvard. He was the student body president, very strong intellect, critical thinking. So I was a combination of my mother, who was open to anything. She'd go hang out with gurus. She was open to all kinds of philosophies. So from her I got this expansive mind that was open to anything. And then my dad's critical thinking. So those two things played very heavily in my work. I often thought, well, every technique, every healing system was created by somebody. So let's explore different ones, find out what they offer, find out what they're good for. And so I really took the approach that the healing arts was really in its infancy, and I was going to expand on that and find better ways to do things, better ways to access information from the body and deliver therapies more and more precisely. But that's farther down the road. This is part one of probably a two-part series. So as a child, my mother was alcoholic, and she was kind of reckless. She would drink and drive with me, and sometimes she would black out and she would wake up, and I'd be sitting in the car just staring at her as a 1-year-old. And another time she took me out on a raft in the ocean in Mexico, and my dad was scuba diving, and a big wave came and flipped the raft over when I was maybe 8 months, 10 months. I could crawl, but I couldn't walk. And the raft flipped over in this giant wave, and when she came up, she couldn't find me, and the water was really murky. She couldn't find me underwater. She was looking for probably a half hour. My dad came up from scuba diving and couldn't find me. And so when they finally went into the beach, apparently that wave had caught me, and I had body surfed it as an 8-month-old into the beach close enough to where I could crawl up onto the sand. So I've often thought that I have very powerful guardian angels, and I have this great purpose in life. So at least that's what I want to believe. So that was a close call. In any case, my mother realized she was a danger to me and left. So that was the great trauma of my life, my mother leaving at age 2. And the impact that has on a small child is tremendous. Being left by your mother, that's the love of your life. And so a lot of the journey of a healer is overcoming their own wounds, their own psychological wounds, their own health, physical health wounds. And so that was the first great injury to me psychologically. My dad, who was an Olympic level swimmer, was also a sugar addict. So I got to experience every Hostess product and every form of junk food you can imagine. And as a result, I had a weak immune system, also from the trauma of my mother not being around. I was sad a lot, and I got to see her every other weekend for the first few years, but that was devastating, going to see her and then every other weekend having to leave her again. It was like ripping a scab off every 2 weeks. So I had a lot of emotional trauma as a kid to work through. And so I got sick a lot, and my dad would take me to medical doctors and I'd get antibiotics, but it never dealt with the root cause of my illness. It never dealt with the emotional trauma, and it never dealt with the nutritional aspects. So as I got older, one of the ways that I adapted to feeling unloved, like when your mother leaves, the mind starts to think, I'm unlovable, even my mother left me. So somehow my mind decided, since my dad was an athlete, I got into sports, and I thought, wow, if I'm a really fantastic athlete, then people will love me. And so I became New England champion. I was living on the East Coast. I was New England champion in gymnastics, New England champion in judo, and in the top 6 in New England in swimming. I also set the New England record for the mile run for 7-year-olds, and I was the MVP of my basketball. I was just this ridiculously accomplished athlete as a small child. But what I realized later on was all of that was to prove that I was lovable. And of course, nothing external is going to change something that's an internal wound. So cut forward to a few years later, I was about 12 years old, and my grandmother got diagnosed with cancer. And all I had known was Western medicine. I spent my summers with my mother at that point, who had moved to California, and she had remarried, and she and her husband were massage therapists, and they were working out of a chiropractic office in Santa Barbara. And so I'd started to get exposed to chiropractic and other forms of healing besides Western medicine. And then my grandmother got cancer, and she was told by her medical doctors that she had about a 10% chance of living 6 months if she got a bone marrow transplant, which was going to cost $100,000 or something like that. And she thought, well, that doesn't sound too good. And she went to Mexico, where there was a clinic there called the Gerson Clinic, and they did nutrition and detoxing. And 7 months later, she was tested as being cancer-free. And so she went back to her doctors in Northern California and to tell them about this great therapy that had cured her without any bone marrow transplants, and they didn't care. They weren't interested. They didn't want to hear about it. And my grandmother was outraged. Here was these doctors that had sworn an oath to help people, help humanity, and yet here she'd gotten cured, and they had no interest in learning about that. So that was pretty influential to me, this idea that Western medicine was more interested in making money than actually healing people. So I spent the next 10 years being angry at them. But that really kind of drove me to look at what are some other ways to get healthy, because I was still suffering with poor health. I had chronic fatigue, and I was an athlete. I was a swimmer, gymnast, and but I was still suffering from low energy and was getting sick every few months, and nobody had really gotten to the root cause of the issues. And so my mother's second husband went to chiropractic school, and in the summer I got to spend time with them, and he exposed me to muscle testing, I think when I was 12 or 13, sometime around there. So that was when I first got introduced to this idea that at the subconscious level, our body has all the information we need for our own healing, and muscle testing is a way to access that information. So that was the first time I had ever heard that concept, that if we can somehow access the body's own innate wisdom, it has the secrets that can unlock what we need for our own healing, both structurally as well as emotionally and chemically as well. So my health and wellness journey is really a long story. It didn't stop when, I got exposed to chiropractic. I still struggled with health issues. So I went to college, UCSB, got my psychology degree, was a gymnast in college, and my mother was practicing as a massage therapist. And after college, something interesting happened. My mother got surgery, and I also had my first ever breakup. So the combination of that and also not knowing what I was going to do with my life, I came down with what we believe now is walking pneumonia. And I was in bed for 3 or 4 months. I just had no energy. And so I just did breathing exercises for 4 months. And finally I decided, if I'm just going to be sick, I'd rather be sick in Hawaii. So I went off to Hawaii just to get things moving. And she had taught me how to cook macrobiotically. She got interested in, she actually got a degree in nutrition and was practicing macrobiotics, which is using a lot of fermented foods and brown rice and vegetables. And so I was learning how to cook like that for her, because after she had hysterectomy surgery, I was cooking for her. And so I started playing around with different forms of diet. And that actually didn't cure me either. It wasn't until several years later when I got into the zone diet and realized that I needed quite a bit more protein than I was getting on, on the macrobiotic diet. So I was searching and searching. So the journey of a healer oftentimes is you search and you find one piece and that improves things for a while, and then you struggle with something else and then you get that piece for a while. And so decades went on. And so whenever I got sick or got injured, I started to learn how to invite that. I'd welcome that, because I knew every time I got sick or injured, I would learn something more about how to heal bodies. And so I started healing my chronic fatigue, and I started learning how to heal old injuries like on my neck from gymnastics. But I was still plagued with this sense of unworthiness. And I was like, how do you unlock that? How do you unblock that? So I was exploring different things with nutrition. I was actually addicted to food. I was overeating, even though I wasn't overweight because I was an athlete. I was eating too much, and it was emotional eating. So I was dealing with all of these different issues, and it took many years, many decades. I was still plagued with a sense of unworthiness, and even though I was at a great college with lots of people, I really didn't have a girlfriend for like 4 years. One of the things I was looking how to do is just clear that idea, clear that sense of being unlovable. So after college, I knew I didn't want to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. People said, are you going to go to grad school and become a psychologist? I knew the mind was important. I knew that that was a vital aspect of the healing process, because I wanted to be free. Free physically, free from illness, free to have tons of energy, free emotionally, free to be creative. Just that sense of freedom, that I'm not blocked by internal blockages, psychological, physical blockages. I wanted to be free of addictions. I was addicted to overeating. I would stuff myself until my stomach hurt. And so I was fascinated by this idea of how do blockages exist in the human body? Psychological blockages, these patterns that were robbing me of my happiness, robbing me of my ability to be successful, to find love, to just be thriving at all these different levels in my life. And so my journey was about exploring to find out how to help people to become free so that they can access their full potential, so that we can all have brilliant, successful, purposeful lives. And so after chiropractic school, I went to massage school. My mother had been doing that for 20, 25 years at that point, I think. And that sounded good to me. You could work 2 hours a day and make as much as you could sitting in an office. And I loved the physicality of it and working with people and hands-on work. So I did that in LA for about 3 years. I realized it was just part of the journey. I wanted to explore much more deeply into the healing arts than just doing massage. I went back to school, got my prerequisites for chiropractic school in 1994. And January of 95, I started chiropractic school in Dallas. In 93, I'd remembered muscle testing. I'd remembered what I had learned from my former stepdad about muscle testing, and I wondered if there was any books on that. And at that time I was doing massage, and I found the book Touch for Health. At that time I was lifeguarding on the beach in Venice, and there were days when there was nobody in the water. It was overcast and cold, so over about a week or two I just memorized that book. And then in the evening when I had massage clients, I would ask them if I could practice on them. And so I started doing muscle testing and learning. Touch for Health is kind of like the layman's version of applied kinesiology. So when I got to chiropractic school in 95, I went to the AK Club, which they had once a week. And so the guy who was leading the meeting was named Mike Reyes, and he was a few trimesters ahead of me, and he was teaching some material there that I had already learned from books. And I went up to him after class and said, real interesting stuff, but I've already learned that on my own. What else do you got? And he says, well, meet me after school. I've been taking seminars in clinical kinesiology. And he showed me that work, and it absolutely blew my mind. I don't have time to go into that. I'll do another video on clinical kinesiology, but it's absolutely mind-blowing what you could do with that. Clinical kinesiology incorporated acupuncture and homeopathy and emotional healing, and it had a way to prioritize things, and it could do things that applied kinesiology had no technology to work with. So Mike became my new best friend. We'd hang out on weekends. He gave me the seminar videos, and I started studying that. So in between trimesters, when we had 2 weeks off, all I did was watch these videotapes. And when I got back to school, Mike and I would practice for 8 to 10 hours a day on the weekend. We'd work on each other and watch videotapes, and some of our classmates would come over to the apartment and we'd work on them. And we were just absolutely fascinated by this technique. And so at some point I realized I had found the technique that I had come to chiropractic school to learn. I didn't come to chiropractic school to be called doctor. I came to be a healer. And I wanted to get my degree. I wanted to complete that. But I was so inspired by that work, it was taking all my focus. In fact, my heart rate went down to 32 at one point. I was in my 6th week of the 3rd trimester, and my heart rate just plummeted to the low 30s. And I couldn't figure out what was going on until one day, a few days later, it still hadn't improved, and I realized, oh, my heart isn't in school. My body's actually telling me my heart isn't in school, even though I was getting practically a 4.0. I needed to drop out of school and just dedicate myself to studying this work. So I dropped out of school, and I went off to New Mexico because I had a friend there, and just started practicing this work. I had 50 hours of videotape, and I'd watch it over and over again. And I was still suffering from my own health issues, but I was just absolutely committed to figuring out how to crack the code, how to communicate with the innate wisdom of the body at the deepest level, and find out how to free myself from the bondage of these old emotional tapes that were still plaguing me, still affecting me, still causing me illness, still causing me to not feel good about myself. I just completely dedicated myself to that for those 6 months, and then I went back to chiropractic school and got my degree. My mentor, Dr. Fox, the man who was teaching clinical kinesiology, he lived in St. Louis, so I would go and spend days at his office and stay at his house. He was a wonderful friend and mentor. We're still very close to this day. And so I'd go watch him practice for 12 hours a day until I'd fall asleep in the chair. He just had boundless energy. And after he'd worked for 12 hours, we'd play ping pong, and I'd ask him hundreds of questions. And then we'd wake up at 5 in the morning, and he'd go swimming, and I'd go with him. I'd go swim, and then he'd go practice for another 12 hours. That's pretty much how I got started. At that point, there was only about, I don't know, 6 or 7 people in the world that knew that technique with any level of proficiency. And so for part B, I wanted to get into how I developed the Whitten method. Essentially, I had completely immersed myself in becoming a clone of Dr. Fox, just learning everything that he knew how to do, because he was getting people well with cancer, with Parkinson's disease, all kinds of, he was working with kids with autism and, you know, some really advanced conditions. And he was just a master. There's the commercials. I want to be like Mike. I want to be like Pat. And so after 3 years, I'd pretty much absorbed all of that. And I still had questions, and I realized there were still some missing components of that work. So that's when the Whitten method story actually begins in around 2000, 2001. And so that'll be part B. So give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching if you're still watching at this point. So have a great day, and we'll see you soon.